Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sanhedrin. We're up to Perik Gimel, Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Chana bad Miriam, Sason ben Ryan, Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And Avdi ben Chaim Lechaim v'derefua shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, B'tok Shach Chulei Yisrael Adachlama Merav Benamin Otzion Chai ben Dvorah. Certain people, including relatives of the litigants and unlearned men, are ineligible to serve as judges. They may nevertheless try a case if both litigants agree to accept their verdict. The Mishnah discusses the right of a litigant to withdraw his agreement after it has been given. Although any agreement made between the two parties in a monetary dispute is legally valid, there are circumstances in which a party can back down from the agreement. Amar lo, if one litigant said to the other, Ne'eman alay Abba, my father is acceptable to me as our judge even though he is a relative. Ne'eman alay avicha, or if he said, your father is acceptable to me as our judge even though he is a relative. Ne'emanin alay shlosha ro'eh bakar, or if he said, 3 cattle herders are acceptable to me as our judges even though they are unfit to be judges at all because they are unlearned. Now, in general, cattle herders were unfit to be judges because they were not knowledgeable of the law. Although all other unlearned men are also unfit to be judges, the Mishnah mentions only cattle herders. This is because cattle herders live far from inhabited areas and did not deal much with people, so they did not know even the practical everyday laws that most people learn in the course of their regular affairs. The Mishnah teaches that even cattle herders can serve as judges if the litigants accept them. Rabbi Meir says, Yachol achzor bo, he can go back in his agreement and insist that the case be retried by eligible judges, even after a verdict was handed down by the judges he selected. Rabbi Meir's ruling applies only where the ineligible judge ruled against the defendant, meaning he required the defendant to pay the disputed money. In that case, Rabbi Meir allows the defendant to withdraw his acceptance of the judge and refuse to pay. However, if the judge ruled against the claimant, meaning he said that the claimant is not entitled to collect the disputed money from the defendant, the claimant cannot go back in his acceptance of the judge. Since the defendant was already holding the disputed money, it became fully his as soon as the ruling went in his favor, and then it's too late for the claimant to withdraw his original agreement. But the sages say, once the verdict has been handed down, he cannot go back in his agreement. The sages hold that neither party can withdraw his acceptance of the judge once the judge has given his decision. Even if the judge ruled against the defendant who was already holding the money, the claimant has the right to take the money from him against his will. The dispute between Rabbi Meir and the sages applies where the litigants had accepted the judge only verbally and had not performed the kinyan, a formal act of acquisition or commitment. If they had performed the kinyan, all agree that neither of them can change his mind any time after that. And the Rav tells us that is the halakha. The halakha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. The Mishnah records a similar dispute. Haya chayav lechavero shvuah. The claimant had to make an oath to the defendant in order to collect the disputed money. V'amarlo, and the defendant said to him, Dor li b'chaye roshcha. If you swear to me by the life of your head that your claim is true, I will pay you. Meaning the defendant agreed to pay, even if the claimant makes only this type of oath, which is weaker than a regular oath. When a court requires someone to take an oath, he must hold a Torah scroll and include the name of Hashem in the oath. In the Mishnah's case, where the claimant was allowed to swear by the life of his head, he does not have to hold a Torah scroll or mention the name of Hashem. Rabbi Meir says, Yachol achzor bo, even after the claimant swore by the life of his head, the defendant can go back on his agreement and demand a regular oath. Although the defendant had agreed to accept a weak oath by the life of your head, and the claimant did make that oath, the defendant can change his mind and refuse to pay unless the claimant makes a regular oath. In the reverse situation, where the defendant had to swear in order to keep the money and the claimant let him take a weak oath, Rabbi Meir agrees that the claimant cannot change his mind. Since the disputed money is in the hands of the defendant, it becomes fully his as soon as he took the weak oath, and then it is too late for the claimant to demand another oath. Here too, the case is that the litigants had made only a verbal agreement. If they had performed an act of kinyan, they cannot change their minds at all, even before the oath is taken. But the sages say, the defendant cannot go back in his agreement after the oath was made. And that is the halacha. The halacha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. And that is the end of Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel, along with Mishnah Daled, lists people who are ineligible to serve as judges or to give testimony in court. Under biblical law, a person becomes ineligible to serve as a judge or a witness if he did any sin that is punishable by execution, karet, or malkut. He is also ineligible if he took money that is forbidden to him, even if he did not become liable to any of these three punishments. Since he broke the law for monetary gain, he cannot be trusted to give honest testimony. If the monetary sin was biblical, for example, outright stealing or lending money for interest, he is disqualified according to biblical law. If the monetary sin was rabbinic, for example, taking property against the owner's will and paying him for it, he is disqualified according to rabbinic law. One who transgresses a biblical law becomes disqualified as soon as he performs the forbidden act, but one who transgresses a rabbinic law does not become rabbinically disqualified until after his disqualification has been announced and publicized. Then went up psulin, and these are some of the people who are ineligible to be judges or witnesses. Hamsachek bekubia, someone who plays dice for money. Gamblers are disqualified from serving as judges or witnesses because they do not provide any benefit to society. A person is forbidden to busy himself except with studying Torah, doing acts of kindness, or he may contribute to society by trading, creating a product, or providing a service. Gamblers do none of these things. A person who leads such an empty lifestyle tends to lack fear of Hashem, and therefore he is disqualified, ineligible to be a judge or witness. Someone who lends money on interest. A person who lends money for interest is disqualified because he breaks a biblical law for monetary gain. The borrower too is disqualified because the Torah forbids even borrowing money with intent to pay interest for it, as learned from Shemot chapter 22 verse 24. Therefore the borrower took money in a forbidden manner. People who raise pigeons for money. He too is a gambler because he bets money that his pigeon will finish first. And people who do business with produce of Shvi'it. The Torah in Vayikra chapter 25 verse 6 states, at the produce of the 7th year, Shemitah shall be yours to eat, which is understood as implying to eat but not for doing business. A person is therefore forbidden to trade in crops that grew during Shemitah. This person is disqualified as a witness because he is willing to transgress a Torah law to make money. The Mishnah explains that the last category used to be wider. Amar Rabbi Shimon said, originally, the sages called them Shvi'it gatherers, meaning they disqualified anyone who gathered a large amount of Shvi'it produce, even if he did not sell it. During the Shvi'it year, fields in Eretz Yisrael must be left open so that anyone can enter and take the produce growing there. The owners of the fields are allowed to store in their homes whatever they need to eat for the next few days, but they may not store larger amounts, as the Rambam writes in Echot Shemitah V'Yovel, chapter 4, Lechat 24. The rabbis disqualified anyone who stores too much Shvi'it produce in violation of this law. Misherabu Anasin, however, when the number of oppressive tax collectors increased and farmers needed to gather large amounts of Shvi'it produce to pay their taxes, Chazul Kotan Socher Shvi'it, the sages switched to calling them Shvi'it merchants, meaning they disqualified only those who also sold the produce they had gathered. But those who merely stored large amounts of produce were not disqualified, since they were saving it for paying taxes and not for their own use. Like we learned earlier, gamblers like dice players and pigeon racers are disqualified to be judges or witnesses. The Mishnah adds that this disqualification does not apply to all gamblers. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Ematai, when are gamblers ineligible? Bizman shenem umanut elehi, when they have no occupation besides gambling. Aval yesh len umanut shelohi ksherin. But if they have an occupation besides gambling, they're eligible. A gambler is disqualified because he contributes nothing to society. Therefore, if he also has a trade or profession that benefits society, he is not disqualified. And that is in Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.